Acts 23, the resurrection of the dead. Kind of an interesting title, considering that they only touched on that one little part in the chapter, but it is a super important part that we're going to go into. Anyway, some of the objectives for today to learn here today is we will know how to identify how to know when someone is righteous or when someone only appears to be righteous. Okay, so we'll be able to choose the different things that Paul was teaching, which caused the Jews to want to kill him. And we'll be able to identify who the holy people are and what would happen when they were shattered. All right, these are some of the things at the end you'll know these things. All right, so Acts 22 ended with Paul telling the Roman centurion that he is a Roman citizen. He actually had just been finished getting beaten up by the Jews. He was in Jerusalem, making an offering for a vow with some of the other Jews who had taken the vow, Jewish Christians. So he's in the temple and he gets accused by the Jews, the Asian Jews. Actually, it actually specifically says the Asian Jews. So it would have been those folks that were persecuting him in like Ephesus. They made an accusation against him saying that he's going around teaching against the people and the law and this place, meaning the temple. They also said he brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place, which was a false allegation that was acknowledged. That they just assumed that, so they said that and added it on, knowing that came with the death penalty. So the Jews, they're angered and they lash out and they begin beating Paul. Paul is essentially rescued by the Roman soldiers who permit him to speak with the crowd who is just beating him. Paul speaks with them and then he angers them more when he mentions that God appeared to him and told him to leave Jerusalem and go and preach salvation to the Gentiles instead. And that just seemed to really anger them and they wanted to beat him and kill him again. So it caused like another little riot, a mini riot among them. So Paul's taken away by the tribune. The tribune looks to torture him to find out why, in fact, this guy is being charged with something. He's trying to get to the bottom of it. So he's going to get information out of Paul by torturing him. So he straps him up, he strings him to a table, and he's about to, whip him. And then Paul says, I'm a Roman citizen. And suddenly that changes everything. And the Roman tribune has to stop torturing Paul. He has to treat him very humanely because citizenship had its benefits. And the tribune still needs to know why Paul's in custody, because here there's a whole crew of people out there looking to kill Paul. He's in his custody. He cannot release Paul because Paul will certainly be killed. So that wouldn't be very useful. And he can't torture Paul. As a matter of fact, the simple act of tying him up and getting him to that point would have been a breach of their law. So he could be in trouble for even going as far as he did. So he's got some concerns on his own. Right? So it's because he was a Roman citizen that he had these rights, and Paul made that known. And that's basically where we end in Acts 22. And that's why we have to kind of start here also with Acts 22 verse 30, because that's the segue into Acts 23. All right, so we'll pick it up here in verse 30 in Acts 22. This is the following morning, okay? On the next day, desiring to know the real reason why he was being accused by the Jews, the tribune, he unbound him and commanded the chief priests and all the council to meet. And he brought Paul down and set him before them. And looking intently at the council, Paul said, brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. So why would Ananias, just from Paul saying that, why would Ananias want to punch Paul in the mouth or have him struck in the mouth, whether with a stick or with a fist or with a slap, however it was? What do you think made him upset?
He believed that he wasn't living before God or according to God's rules.
Yeah, probably something like that. I mean, I could think of a few different reasons. I don't know if any of these are exactly 100% right, but the one thing I know is that he didn't address the council very respectfully. Okay, this council is used to being referred to when they're addressed the way Peter did it in Acts 4, where he said rulers of the people and elders. That's how you were customarily supposed to address them. Rulers of the people and elders. Paul calls them brothers. So that's like he's bringing them down a level. See what I'm saying? He's not acknowledging their authority necessarily. He's calling them brothers. All right. That automatically didn't hold any favor or sway in their eyes. You know, that would have been insulting right off the bat. Second thing is it could be because Paul said that he had a good conscience, where in other words, he's claiming that he did nothing wrong, nothing, he didn't do anything which violates his own conscience. He feels like he is blameless in all this. Like he's still going to stick to what he's saying is true. Nothing wrong. Perhaps it was the way he was looking at them, where it says he was looking intently at the council. Maybe he was like, you know, had that look of like where he's scrutinizing them to a certain degree that maybe didn't sit well with Ananias. Or perhaps Ananias just felt that Paul, you know, striking Paul would be, you know, would be a good thing for him to do. Maybe he's just a cruel person, you know, who knows? It could be a combination of any of these things. But all we know is that Paul here is standing before the council. He starts talking and he gets, boom, smacked right in the mouth. Doesn't even get out, like, finish his first sentence necessarily. So it's not starting out very well, this whole, let's go before the council and speak to them and let me find out why these charges are against you. Then Paul says to him, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting to judge me according to the law? And yet contrary to the law, you order me to be struck? Those who stood by said, would you revile God's high priest? And Paul said, I did not know, brothers, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. Okay. Paul, you know, he's the same Paul who wrote 1 Corinthians 15, which is, you know, the chapter regarding love, actually 1 Corinthians 13 rather. And he, you know, so in that he's preaching patience and kindness and stuff. And here it seems like he's lashing out, right? He's saying back to the high priest, you're a whitewashed wall. That's some harsh words. You're a whitewashed wall. Does that remind you guys of anything? Have you heard something like that anywhere else in the Bible that may be reminiscent of, like, this whitewashed wall thing?
Like Jesus was like, well, you like scribes and Pharisees.
Exactly. I have that here, Matthew 23, 27, 28. I mean, Paul here, like, goes back at him with those words, like, Jesus' teaching is to turn the other cheek, you know, so, like, you would have thought, but here he's giving his retort. And yeah, this reminds me exactly of that, as you said, Matthew 23, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, talking the same type of group of people, the Pharisees and the scribes, right? Hypocrites, he calls them. That's basically what Paul's saying, is that you're a hypocrite. You're judging me according to the law, and yet you strike me, which is contrary to the law. For you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. So Paul calls them whitewashed walls. Jesus calls them whitewashed tombs. Either way, they're being called clean on the outside and filthy on the in. Okay. They're being called hypocrites in both situations. They're being called out for looking like they're doing God's work, for looking pious and righteous and doing God's work on earth, but they're just appearing like that to people. They're not really that on the inside. They're really wicked on the inside. And they proved that, actually, by having Paul smacked in the mouth. They proved that by beating, torturing, and crucifying Jesus, and even his apostles after him. They proved just how evil they truly were and how contrary to God's nature and God's law that they were. They didn't walk in righteousness. And this is a good reminder for us, a good lesson for us. And we kind of talked about this last night, which is kind of interesting because all these things always seem to connect. We must not judge a book by its cover, right? Meaning that we must not judge people simply by how they look, because people can present themselves a certain way just to look a certain way, and you can fake that, like it's been done through history, obviously, even especially here as being evidenced. The outside is not always consistent with what's going on in somebody's heart, okay? And as Jesus said in Matthew 7:16, you can recognize them by their fruit. You will know them by their fruit. So people who walk with God would not accept, allow, or approve of injustice, to others, like is what you see here. People who walk with God would not speak falsely about others. People who walk with God would not say one thing and then do another thing. The people of God will walk in his ways of justice and love for one another and in truth. That's what the people of God do. They're consistent with what they say and what they do. So you will know them by their fruit, how they live and what their life produces, period. That's how you will know when somebody's righteous. Now, when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other part Pharisees, he cried out in the council, saying, "Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial here today." Okay, so we're going to park on this verse for a while, because it kind of struck me interesting when I got here that Paul says that I'm on trial in regards to the hope and the resurrection of the dead. Now, this is the first time I heard this accusation against him, and he's confessing it as himself. And I don't think he's lying. I don't think he's lying simply to get on the side of the Pharisees. I think the resurrection of the dead was part of the message he was preaching. But if you remember, he was accused of some specific things. He was accused of speaking against the people and the law and this place. And moreover, he brought a Greek into the temple. Those were the specific things that were identified in Acts 21 as to why they were persecuting him. None of that sounds like resurrection, but here he's talking about the resurrection. So I need to make a case for how the resurrection ties in to part of this persecution that's going on, because he was certainly preaching the resurrection. He was preaching against the people. He was preaching against the temple, but he was preaching all true, like most prophets do. They're not readily accepted when basically what's being preached is the coming destruction, right? In less than a decade, this temple would be gone. And Paul was telling them what is happening here, okay? We looked at Hebrews 8 last week, and that showed us how the old covenant was being removed and the new covenant was being put into place, how the old like system with the high priest is being replaced by a new high priest who is ruling in the heavenly places. So we looked at that last week, so we're not gonna have to look at that again today. But we'll look at some other verses that support the idea of this Old Testament resurrection. Okay, because we have to establish that the Old Testament does talk about a resurrection first, because the Pharisees believed in a resurrection. So what resurrection were they thinking of? What was it that they thought was going to happen? So we need to go back and look at their scriptures to see that there was resurrection talk in the Old Testament, and understand how Paul probably would have been speaking about it in his time when he got arrested for that being part of his message. Okay. So in Hosea, we see this verse. Shall I ransom them from the power of Sheol? Shall I redeem them from death? O death, where are your thorns? O Sheol, where is your sting? Compassion will be hidden from my sight. So Sheol is the place the place where they say is under the earth, where the dead go and sleep. This would be like a place for your souls, not necessarily your physical bodies, but where your soul or spirit goes under the earth in Sheol. With like a holding place. And according to biblical cosmology, it's located under the earth. This is what the Bible identifies the earth as actually looking like. So there they would go, and then there would be this resurrection from Sheol. They would come out from Sheol. They will come out and they will go somewhere else. But Hosea doesn't really tell us that right now. It just says that death will have no hold over them. Sheol will have no power over them. So they will not be kept there. In Job 19, verse 26, it says, "Even after my skin is destroyed, yet from my flesh I shall see God." Psalm 16:10 says, "For you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to undergo decay." Now that specifically is talking about Jesus. As we know, that was fulfilled in him. His flesh did not see any decay. He was only in the grave for 3 days. So he went to this place of the underworld where the dead was in Sheol, and he rose from the grave physically. Psalm 49:15. But God will redeem my soul from the power of Sheol, for he will receive me. Selah. Okay. So here you have the idea that, again, coming out of Sheol, being received by God. So these are all resurrection verses that the Pharisees would have known. And here's a big one, Isaiah 26:19 through 21. Your dead shall live, their bodies shall rise. You who dwell in the dust, awake and sing for joy. For your dew is a dew of light, and the earth will give birth to the dead. Come, my people, enter your chambers, shut your doors behind you. Hide yourselves for a little while until the fury has passed by. All right, so the dead will live. The earth will give up the dead. But according to Isaiah, when he wrote this, not yet, not at the time that he wrote this, he's telling them, enter your chambers, enter and shut the doors behind you, hide yourselves for a little while until the fury has passed. So we have our first indicator that the resurrection is tied to judgment by God. So there's God's fury and the resurrection. So he will tell them to enter the chambers and wait. The idea here is of sleep, like a sleeping chamber, going into the chambers, all right? Sleep and wait until the judgment of God is complete upon his people. All right, so there's the idea that the resurrection takes place after or at the time of judgment. Verse 21. For behold, the Lord is coming out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the land for their iniquity, and the land will disclose the blood that was shed upon it, and will no more cover its slain. So verse 21, Isaiah continues talking about the Lord Yahweh coming out of his place. And we know that Jesus came out of heaven, right? He came out of heaven, came down to earth. He lived, died, was crucified, buried, and resurrected. Came back to life 3 days after being in the ground. And then he ascended into heaven. And then at his second coming, he was coming to punish the inhabitants of the land. Who inhabits the promised land? No, the Israelites are in the promised land, right? So he's gonna punish those in the land, and that's a reference to the promised land, the Israelites. So there's a resurrection and a judgment to come upon the inhabitants of the land, according to Isaiah 26. So we've established so far that the Old Testament spoke of a resurrection of the dead, and we've established that there would be a judgment on the people of the land of Judah. So let's be clear, this judgment would include God's wrath upon the people and God's wrath upon the whole religious system, which includes the temple. We just have not established yet that they would happen at the same time as what seems to be part of Paul's message, like that he's preaching that the end is coming, where the temple's going to be destroyed, the people are going to be destroyed, and Jesus is the only way for salvation. And then there's a resurrection of the dead that, you want to be in that resurrection. You want to gain eternal life rather than get cast into the second death. So this seems like what Paul's talking about. We just haven't tied it all in together yet in terms of timing, but the book of Daniel actually does that really, really well for us. Daniel 12. At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince who has charge of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as had never been seen since there was a nation till that time. All right. Did you know that Jesus was quoting this exact verse in Matthew 24 when he said these words? For then there will be great tribulation such as never been since the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. So most people don't catch that. That is Jesus quoting from Daniel, that he's talking to the Pharisees of his day. He's in the middle of telling them about the destruction that's coming upon them soon. Jesus spoke these words. So it's all starting to come together a little bit here in Daniel 12. Daniel spoke of the tribulation coming on Judah in future days. Jesus spoke about the tribulation coming upon Judah in his generation. So the timing for these events are undoubtedly the generation who lived with Jesus at the time of Jesus, the first century Judeans. All right. At that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to everlasting contempt. Here is where you find your resurrection passage. Okay? As we see here, this is tied in with the tribulation he just mentioned in the first line. The tribulation comes, and then right attached to that is this resurrection. Some coming back to everlasting life, which would be living eternity in heaven, what we call heaven. And others would go to everlasting contempt, which many commonly refer to as hell. But for consistency's sake, we will just refer to it as like the lake of fire, the second death, which is spoken about in Revelation. So people come out of their death chambers where their soul sleeps in Sheol. They are judged. Some go up to heaven like that from Sheol in the resurrection, straight up into heaven. Okay. And some go into a lake of fire to experience a second death as supported by the book of Revelation. But we definitely have what we have here in Daniel 12 is tying together the tribulation and the resurrection at the same time. Okay. Yeah, next one. Verse 3 in Daniel 12. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. And I just want to acknowledge right here, Paul is one of the people he's speaking about here, okay? And the other first century apostles are being spoken about right here, because they did exactly this. Paul's exactly standing on trial right now at the time of we're reading Acts 23, and he's attempting to turn people to righteousness. And that's what this is talking about here. Those who turn many to righteousness. The apostles turned people to righteousness. Paul's one of them. He's trying to tell them what the right thing to do is. And he succeeded in many cases. He's still succeeding today. His words are still passed down to us, to this generation today, where we can walk in his ways and learn from him from 2,000 years removed from the actual events that he was going through on that day. So yeah, so he fulfills that just in himself. So anyway, verse 4. But you, Daniel, shut up the words, seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. So unlike the book of Revelation, which is very similar to this chapter of Daniel, Revelation has said that the things are going to happen soon and to keep the book open because things are going to happen soon. This book tells Daniel to close up the book, seal it, put it away, because these things aren't going to happen in his generation, and they certainly didn't. They didn't happen for another 500 years about. So the question becomes, like when you read this, what is it the end of, the time of the end? That's a lot of people assume that it's talking about the end of all time, but there was going to be an end of something, right? Not the end of the world. It was going to be the end of the people that were in the promised land. It was going to be the end of what they knew as their land, in their place, for their religion, their people. It was going to be their end. All right. And I'll establish that in a little bit, that's who they are, because it makes it clear in Daniel 12 that they are the Jews actually in the first century, the ones who were, you have to remember, the Jews altogether were entrusted with the oracles of God out of all people on earth. They were a chosen people. They were a holy people. They were a set apart people from everybody else on the earth, because everybody else kind of just made up stuff as they went along based on maybe some myths that they have heard or whatever led them to their beliefs. But the Jews had real oracles from the one true creator God who chose them out of all people just based on a promise that he made to Abraham. And he chose these people, and they either decided to live out the way God was telling them to live out or to do evil, as we've seen numerous times throughout the Bible that they didn't choose correctly. But either way, them as a people were definitely a people. They were a government unto themselves and free up until the time Assyria came in and destroyed them and destroyed the first temple. And that was Babylon, but they took out the northern kingdom, and then Babylon comes in and destroys the first kingdom, first temple. Then they come back into the land and they're living there a short time, and then obviously it happens again. But Daniel is actually writing during the time of the exile after the destruction of the first temple. So that already happened. And now he's speaking of another time when the end of all these things is going to happen. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others stood, one on this side of the bank of the stream and the other on the other side of the bank of the stream. And someone said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, how long shall it be till the end of these things, of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, he raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it would be for a time, times, and half a time, and that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. So that's something I need you to catch. When the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. In other words, when the Jews in Judah are utterly destroyed, and when all these things, that's when all these things would be finished. All the things he talked about here. He talked about a tribulation, he talked about a resurrection. And when the power of the holy people, the power of the holy people is God's word to the holy people. They received, like I said, the oracles of God. They had a system in place where God made a way that they could have had deliverance and they could have lived righteously, and they didn't. They couldn't. When that came to an end, that's when the resurrection is supposed to happen. It would have been fit. Everything that he wrote here is finished by that time. So when I put it all together, it seems like Paul is being persecuted for preaching these different things. Preaching the tribulation that's coming, okay? And we know on this side of history that a great tribulation did come upon them very shortly after Paul said these words. They suffered through pestilence, famine, disease, and death at the sword of Roman soldiers, okay? Starting in like 67 AD, and this was probably happening around 58, 59 AD. So it was less than a decade later that they went through all this tribulation. And then you have destruction. Paul definitely was speaking that the temple was going to be destroyed, and he was speaking true, because not less than 10 years later, it did happen. Not one stone was left upon another of that temple, as Jesus predicted. And the reason for that was because all the elements in the temple, everything that was in there melted. The priest, everything was eliminated, and the lampstands and the altars and everything that was covered in gold, all that gold melted, and it melted down into the foundations of that building. And the Roman soldiers, in order to get to that gold, had to turn over every stone on top of another in order to dig to that gold where it settled. It's an interesting thing to know. And that happened very, very soon after Paul said these things. Desolation, everything that they knew about the land that they lived in was going to cease to exist. They would no longer be living in that land. By 73 AD, they were out of there. So that war with the Romans it occurred for 7 years. At the 3.5-year mark, you had the destruction of the temple, and it carried on for another 3.5 years, where eventually the remaining Jews committed mass suicide at a place called Masada. I think it was a fortress, and they just ended themselves rather than dying at the swords of the Romans, and that they were gone. The land was left desolate, not a very long time after this. And then you have deliverance. Actually, Paul was preaching deliverance, that they could be saved by faith in Jesus Christ. I'm sure that was part of his message. He spoke of Jesus, and I'm sure he warned those who would listen to him that this destruction was coming. And just like Jesus taught, that when they see Jerusalem surrounded by an army, to flee to the mountains. All in Judea was supposed to flee to the mountains. So I'm sure part of Paul's message was this idea that you could be delivered from this incoming horrible stuff that's going to happen to you, this tribulation, this destruction. If you see when the army is coming, you flee and you go to the mountains. The Christians did. The Christians in Jerusalem at the time did do that when the army surrounded Jerusalem. But many, many more died in that city, within the city walls. And they were killing each other. There was 3 factions within the city itself that were just killing each other off. They destroyed their own food supply. They created their own famine inside those walls. It was a horrible, horrible time. And Paul's warning them that this stuff is coming and they could find deliverance and faith in Jesus Christ. I'm sure part of his message was the resurrection from the dead, that those who are dead in Christ can be resurrected and live eternally with Christ in heaven, just as was understood by the Pharisees, that there was this resurrection from the dead. As Daniel 12 establishes, the tribulation, the end of Judaism, and the resurrection all happens at the same time. And this is super important to understand why Paul was being persecuted so strongly, why they hated him so much. And he was a modern day prophet in that town, telling the people that their doom was near, and that the only way to be saved, both literally in their physical flesh and in their spiritual flesh, was to be in Jesus. And he was giving them good warning. And like any other good prophet, they get persecuted severely. So now you know why Paul was bringing up the resurrection. He wasn't lying about speaking about the resurrection. The resurrection was coming too. It was coming at the same time as the tribulation, the same time as the destruction, the same time as the desolation. All this stuff was coming very soon. Now we can go back to Acts 23 and get back on course here. When he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, as one would probably predict. And the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, nor angel, nor spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. So the Pharisees believe in the resurrection, the Sadducees did not. And that's why, as Joe taught me, that's why they're sad, you see? Okay, because they don't got a resurrection. They're sad, you see? Randy wants to take credit for that. All right, anyway. Then a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes of the Pharisees' party stood up and contended sharply. We find nothing wrong in this man. What if a spirit or an angel spoke to him? And when the dissension became violent, the tribune, afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him away from among them by force and bring him into the barracks. So here we go again. Violence in the temple for the third time on the second day, just since Paul's been in town. So since he's been in the temple. Because it's the third time there's violence, and the Roman tribune has got to be freaking out. I know I would be freaking out if I was in charge. I'd be like, what is going on here? Why do I have this man as a prisoner? Why are they flipping out? What am I to do with him? I can't release him. He's going to get killed. I got to take care of him. And I don't know why I got him. And like, he's got to be like, just out of his mind right about now with wonder and amazement and concern, for the security of him, his people, and everything else.
So they were in the temple when they were not outside.
They were inside what's called it's inside the temple walls, but it's not in the inner part of the temple where only Jews could go. It was in what's called the court of the Gentiles. It's the surrounding bigger area. The following night, the Lord stood by him and said, "Take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome." And I find this to be so cool. Like Paul listens to the Holy Spirit, right? He goes to Jerusalem, even though the Holy Spirit has been telling him that chains and imprisonment await him there. He's like, I gotta go, and he's prodded to go. He's going to go regardless, even though everything's been made clear that he's going to suffer when he gets to Jerusalem, and he still goes. And then he goes and he speaks to the Jews, and he speaks about Christ, and he speaks about all the things that he's accused of, and the Jews don't like it one bit. So they throw in the fact that they say he brought in a Gentile into the inner part of the temple where Jews could only go, which is punishable by death, which was a false allegation. But the other stuff, they had right. He was speaking against the temple in a way that the temple was going to be destroyed. The people were going to be destroyed. Everything was going to come to an end. And certainly, like anybody in their natural self wouldn't want to hear that, right? So they persecuted him. And here Jesus appears to him and says, take courage. He's coming here to encourage Paul. Be like, listen, you're doing a good job. You're doing great. Like, really, I mean, imagine Jesus coming out of, to you in a vision after you just finished standing up for him in a very hostile place. And he's like, don't worry about it. You got this. You're doing great. This is exactly what needs to happen. And it must have been very, very encouraging for Paul to receive another revelation from Christ. Like, I think this might be the third or fourth time Jesus appeared to him in the book of Acts, encouraging him. But it's like hearing "well done," right? Good and faithful servant, well done. Like he's got to be pretty happy about hearing this, and told he's going to be going to Rome and he's going to be doing more of it. So like, I don't know what Paul felt about that. I know he wanted to go to Rome, but you know, I think he also knows his days are numbered once he gets there. So anyway, Jesus is like, be of good cheer. You're doing great. You're going to Rome. When it was day, the Jews made a plot and bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink until they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 who made this conspiracy. All right, so they made a pact not to eat or drink and kill Paul. Now we do know that they didn't succeed in that. They didn't kill Paul, so you have to wonder if they ever went back to eating and drinking again.
Maybe they didn't kill them because they were hungry.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I heard from one preacher said that like the high priest could have ordered absolution for vows made that could not be carried out. So like eventually they can go back and eat, you know, but
Then that would hang on the high priest,
it would hang on the high priest.
the breaking of that. Because it can't go unanswered for it.
So something has to give.
So yeah, someone has to reconcile it.
So I guess he did. But anyway, they're dead set on killing him. Obviously, 40 of them took this vow, and it's a serious thing to do, as you just attested to. Like you don't just take a vow lightly. You're going to follow through with this.
And when it says Jews, like usually that means like people with like titles, like some like Pharisees or someone. Usually Jews like religious leaders.
Yeah, but it doesn't specify here necessarily, because they do in the next thing you'll see, they go and they ask the Jewish council like to do this. We'll see. Let's move on. But all we know right here is that they want Paul dead. Like they want him dead so bad, they're willing to take a vow for it. So they went to the chief priests and elders. See, so they go into the council and they're going to say that we're going to do this. And they said, we have strictly bound ourselves by an oath to taste no food till we have killed Paul. Now, therefore, you, along with the council, give notice to the tribune to bring him down to you as though you were going to determine his case more exactly. There's some shady stuff going on. They're like, hey, let's pretend like you're going to determine the case more exactly and we're going to kill him. Call him down here. And we are ready to kill him before he comes. Now, the son of Paul's sister heard of their ambush. So he went and he entered the barracks and he told Paul. So who knew Paul had a nephew in town? I had no idea he had a nephew in town. Like it just like was like news to me. Like I've read the book of Acts a few times and I just never made the connection. But anyway, like Paul's nephew is there. He hears what's going on for some odd reason. He you know, God's providence, I think, is working through all this, obviously. And he goes and he tells Paul, hey, listen, they're going to come kill you. Paul called one of the centurions and said, take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to tell him. Now, you have to remember, a centurion, just so you know, a centurion is in command of a century of soldiers. So it's 100 soldiers. So the centurion himself is a high-ranking official, all right? He has 100 people reporting to him. Paul tells the centurion, I'm sure he requests from the centurion, to go get the tribune, who is in charge of all the centurions. You know what I mean? So he's like, I need the big guy with this one. So he took him and brought him to the tribune and said, Paul the prisoner called me and asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to say to you. The tribune took him by his hand and going aside, asked him privately, what is that you have to tell me? And he said, the Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire somewhat more closely about him. No, I don't think that's really him. But you know, we lose sight, like we think it's like a little boy. I really don't think it was a little boy, but anybody in their teenage years. But he probably was like Paul was studying at the feet of Gamaliel, right? Paul was a student. Paul was a student in Jerusalem. All right. Paul was a student in Jerusalem, right? When he was studying at the feet of Gamaliel, as we talked about like last time. So this is probably the same thing his nephew is doing. He's in Jerusalem, also probably learning. That's why he was in the council. He was probably studying at the feet of one of the elders in the council. That's what I would imagine to be. So he probably was a young man, not necessarily a child, but probably over 13, probably younger than 20.
Yeah, like they're talking about like families like Pharisees and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It's, yeah. Do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for him, and have bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for your consent. So the tribune dismissed the young man, charging him, tell no one that you have informed me of these things. Okay, so there's 40 people lying in ambush to kill one little Jewish man. All right, that's a lot of assassins. That's a lot of assassins for one guy. Like, they really are going to succeed. You know what I mean? When you have 40 guys dead set on killing one person, you know that your chances of success are going to be pretty darn good. It might be, yeah, probably a significant number. So they really want him dead, and the tribune really wants to keep Paul alive, mind you. Paul's a Roman citizen. He has his rights. He cannot be harmed. He's in his custody. He doesn't know why he's in his custody necessarily. He's still trying to figure that out. So he's in a predicament too. So he has an issue. This is what he does. He called 2 of the centurions and said, get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea at the 3rd hour of night. Also provide mounts for Paul to ride on a horse and bring him safely to Felix the governor. And he wrote a letter to this effect. So whoever here is good at math, tell me, how many soldiers or how many members of the Roman military were sent to protect Paul? 470 Roman warriors are going to escort Paul out of town. Like, yeah, no, like they obviously
just doubled it to, like 80 or something.
I don't know, but like it's just interesting. Like, there's that many, that there's a ton. Yeah, well, but so this goes to show you how important it is for this tribune to keep Paul alive. He cannot die in his custody. He cannot. It's not an option. Like, it would cost him his everything. All right, so he provides this tremendous escort to take Paul, actually what might be considered like to a vacation resort area in Caesarea, which is a nice coastal town, like in the Mediterranean Sea. It's probably beautiful. Here's what he writes. This is a letter that he writes. Claudius Lysis, to his excellency, the governor Felix. Now, the governor is the same job that Pontius Pilate had. Pontius Pilate was the governor procurator of Judea, and so is this guy now, many years later, Felix. Okay, so he's got the same job as Pontius Pilate. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them when I came upon them with the soldiers and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman citizen. And desiring to know the charge for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to their council. I like how he makes himself kind of like a hero after learning that he was a Roman citizen. Like, I rescued him. That's not really exactly how it went down. Like, he was getting beaten and they arrested him and were going to torture him. But that part he just kind of leaves out because it's not going to be beneficial really to talk about that. So anyway, I found that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. And when it was disclosed to me that there would be a plot against this man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. So he's obviously raising it up a level. He's bringing it to the governor, saying, Governor, I have this prisoner. I do not really know what to do with him. I don't know how to protect him. I don't know what the accusations are against him. I'm going to send him to you, and then I'm going to send the people that are accusing him to you also. They can explain it to you. He's coming to you, and you know, please figure this out for me. I'm done. Well, he's going to get killed. He's really going to get killed. Well, the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. So you can see that it's on the route. I put it up here so you can see the map. Where the red line starts, that's Jerusalem. Antipatris is like halfway, and then the rest of the way to Caesarea. And the next day they returned to the barracks, letting the horsemen go on with them. When they had come to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they presented Paul also before him. And on reading the letter, he asked what province Paul was from. And when he learned that Paul was from Cilicia, he said, I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive. And he commanded him to be guarded in Herod's praetorium. Okay, and that's where Acts 23 ends. And it's not too bad for Paul actually ending here. He's going into Herod's praetorium, which you could see kind of like the remnants of there on the Sea of Caesarea. This is the governor's mansion. All right, so he's not necessarily going to be held in the prison like he was, you know, in different other aspects of his life. He's a prisoner. He's not allowed to leave, but it's almost like he's just like in protective custody. Yeah, well, similar to that, right? But he can't go free, but he's being protected against any harm to him, and he's not being treated like a prisoner. He's being put up in the governor's place, which is as good as it gets, right? So we're going to review real quick what we just learned here in Acts 23 today. We learned that we can know someone is righteous by the fruits that their life produces. We cannot judge one based merely on how they look or what they say. Their words and their actions must meet up. That's how we can judge righteously. We also learned that the Jews wanted Paul to be put to death because he was preaching about a coming tribulation, about a destruction, about the desolation, and that deliverance and resurrection to eternal life were found in Jesus Christ. And we learned that the holy people were the Jews, and they had received the oracles of God. And when their existence ended, that would also be the time of the resurrection of the dead. Oh, we have to finish with the quiz, right? Let's see how Gray was paying attention. Gray.
Ethan always wants
I know.
to do getting 100% on these quizzes when you think that he's sleeping.
How can we know for certain someone who talks and looks righteous actually is righteous? Is it A, by the luxurious clothing that they wear? B, that they're wearing a black robe when they preach? C, that their words match their deeds? You will know them by their fruits. Or D, they will speak smooth words and tell you what you want to hear. Awesome. Yeah, I think you were right. No, but that's what everybody's attracted to. Anyway. What things was Paul preaching that angered the Jews? A, that the temple was going to be destroyed. B, that Jerusalem was going to be desolate. C, that the Jews would experience a great tribulation. D, that faith is in Jesus Christ. That through faith in Jesus, the Jewish people could be delivered from certain death and receive resurrection to eternal life. Or E, all the above. You guys are on point.
It looks like it's written like Jesus, the Jewish people.
I know. Well,
I just saw that.
did you have to bring your grammatical gun to the anyway? The grammar, please. Okay, who were the holy people? A, the holy people were the Romans. B, the holy people were the Jews, and when their culture came to an end, the resurrection of the dead would occur. C, the holy people are Republicans in America today. Or D, the holy people are those who go to church on Sunday.
It's definitely B.
It's B. Good, Greg. Very good. All right, you guys did awesome. Join us next week for another fascinating continuation of the story of Paul's persecution.
I thought that we ended last week where